A key question for the Trump administration is whether it truly can weaken Russia's support for Syria, given that Moscow is Bashar Assad's biggest military ally in the Middle East. Here's President Trump this week on the Fox Business Network.
Frankly, Putin is backing a person that's truly an evil person. And I think it's very bad for Russia. I think it's very bad for mankind. It's very bad for this world.
Cliff May is the founder and president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good to see you, Cliff. Welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
So a week later, after the bombing of the Syrian airfield, how does that look as a way of changing the incentives and the behavior in the Middle East?
Well, in terms of Vladimir Putin, I think it causes him to reconsider. We know a few things, I believe, about Vladimir Putin after all these years. One is that, in his view, and it's a realistic view, the leader of Russia has a job to do, and that is to expand, in this case, to rebuild the Russian Empire.
Right.
He wants to do that at home in Eastern Europe with the former Soviet states. He also wants to do that in the Middle East. He wants an Arab ally. He wants a warm water port on the Mediterranean. He gets both in Syria. But for Putin, it's more business than personal. If he gets what he wants, I don't think he needs Assad. That said, Dan Henninger, I think, is right. If Assad were to run a little Alawite homeland, right, and there were a port there, that might be good enough. Keep in mind, Putin has been playing a weak hand very well. He doesn't want to see Trump now play trump cards, if you'll excuse the expression, and beat him. But
here's the thing. I have seen no evidence so far in Russian behavior or Russian statements that they are at all backing away from Assad. In fact, you know, they vetoed the resolution at the United Nations this week that, you know, to sanction, to assail Assad. So is there any sign at all that they're delinking?
No, we haven't seen that yet. Certainly what he did at the UN, which was to totally negate international law at its most basic level, was a terrible thing. We haven't seen that. On the other hand, Syria is a failing state. It's Humpty Dumpty. I don't see how it gets put back together again. One of the things that I would imagine the Trump administration is considering are what's sometimes called safe havens. I'd call them self-protection zones. That's likely to lead to some kind of partition of the state. If that happens, then there will come a point where it's just the reality on the ground, the facts on the ground, that Assad doesn't rule the whole country. Now, part of that may be ruled by ISIS, part of that may be ruled by various sectarian and ethnic groups. If you have safe havens or self-protection zones on the Israeli border, the Jordanian border, the Kurdish areas, those will not be part of Assad's Syria any longer. There may be things that have to be accepted by Putin, and I think he can accept them.
Well, and we know that Donald Trump did talk about these safe havens, safe zones in the campaign. So it's not something that he'd be flip-flopping on if he went in that direction. But that would require American air power to enforce, and that would ramp up the potential confrontation with Russia. Do you think that you'd see any? How big a risk is there of a military engagement between the two countries?
I would think that Putin would back down if the U.S. were clear that it was going to, for example, establish a no-fly zone. One thing that's been talked about for a long time, I think it would have been a good idea, it's certainly possible to do without boots on the ground, is to eliminate Assad's air power, his entire air force. Just a few airfields, not a lot of planes, then he couldn't do barrel bombs, couldn't do chemical weapons. Once you do that, a no-fly zone's not so hard. With a no-fly zone, it's not so hard to set up the self-protection zones.
Is there an alliance to be had with the Sunni countries of the Middle East and Turkey, perhaps, where you could get, with the U.S. could lead that, put that together? I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and so on, Jordan, where you could put together an alliance that was really, that protected these safe zones and basically was a force to fight the Iranian-Russian Assad triumvirate.
I think so, with some reservations. One is that the Sunni states, the Gulf states, Saudis, absolutely should be supportive of this. I think they should also be asked to pay for this. As for actually supplying troops, that's a little more doubtful. But Jordan will, and again, quietly, Israel will, on its border. In some ways it already is. It's supporting very quietly the Druze across its border in Syria. So this sort of thing can be arranged. This is exactly what diplomacy can do if diplomacy is backed up by force. the idea that Obama had that diplomacy and force are alternatives, that was always really a very naive mistake.
All right, so let's step back a bit. You're looking at the first days of Trump foreign policy. Are we seeing the emergence of what you would call a kind of, for lack of a better word, a normal kind of Republican administration foreign policy? Quite a contrast to what he ran on.
I don't think that's unfair. I think that's in a way true, though if I were speaking for the administration, which I'm not,
I know.
Here's what I would say, that the Trump administration is going to be for what's in the American interest. But the American interest is not only to stop acts of terrorism inside our borders. The American interest is to recognize that there are threats overseas that are maturing that we have to deal with in advance. I think that's very much what he has just done in terms of Syria, very much what he has done in terms of Afghanistan. Among other things, those two acts this week, they begin to reestablish the capability of strategic deterrence, which the U.S. used to have but lost during the Obama administration. That's vital for American interests. You want to establish a sense of awe in your enemies and in your allies as well.
All right, Cliff May, very interesting. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Paul.